Hey everybody, it's Dan Kroll again. This is episode 4 of the Britt, Kanawha, West Hancock Athletics podcast. Just a quick recap. If you want to go to any of the other 3 episodes, you just type in my name on YouTube. That's my channel. I talked to Kevin Sanger, and then a month or so ago, talked to Steve Everett II. A couple weeks ago, I talked to Denny Brum. And tonight, for episode 4, I have Bob Steenlidge. Bob, I'll give him a full introduction in a little bit, but Bob is the first ever 4-time state wrestling champion in Iowa history and the second in the nation to accomplish 4 state titles. He is a Britt alum. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Good to be here, Dan.
You bet. So before we get to Bob, I just want to give you some updates on West Hancock events and teams. There's not a lot on the calendar right now. Tomorrow there's a middle school science fair, and then possibly March 1st, the girls' state basketball tournament. As Bob and I are talking right now, the girls' basketball team is playing in a regional final against Dyke New Hartford over in Hampton. So if they win tonight, they go to state. So I'll just start with the girls' basketball team. Playing right now, they're 19-5. In their first playoff game, they defeated Manson Northwest Webster 59-39. And then the other night, they beat West Fork 68-36. And like I said, they're playing Dyke New Hartford right now to go to state. Kennedy Kelly and Rachel Lear were first team all conference. Mallory Lear, a freshman, was honorable mention. So hopefully by next podcast, I'll be talking about how we did at state basketball. Boys basketball team wrapped up their season with a 12-12 record. I think that's pretty good for Coach Jay Hiscock's first year. They won their first playoff game by 10 against St. Ed's, and then they lost 67-25 to Lake Mills. If I were a betting person and I put money on high school sports, I'd bet on Lake Mills to win the state title. They're pretty darn good. Them or Martinsdale St. Mary's, which is just down the road from where we live. Ryland and Kaysen Barnes were second team all conference, and Braden Walk was honorable mention. They had a 7-game winning streak throughout the season to get their record back to 12-12. So they had a nice year. The wrestling team was kind of the highlight of the last week. They sent 8 guys to state, or they sent 8 guys to districts and sent 6 to state from there. Evan Boothroyd lost both matches and did not place. Kellen Smith finished 6th. Kane Zool lost both of his matches and did not place. Briar's Subject finished his career at state at 5th place. Matthew Francis was 3rd as a junior. Cole Kelly was also 3rd. He wrapped up his career down at state. With all that being said, they finished 5th in Class 1A at the state traditional tournament. So that was one of our highest placings we've had in a long time. And then the day before the traditional tournament, our boys wrestled at state duels and finished 6th. They gave the runner-up Lisbon all they could handle in the first round, but lost by just a couple. Then they beat West Sioux and then lost to Lake Mills to take 6. So great job, Coach Sanger and his staff and his guys there. Real quick here, the Sanger Legacy Fund was created to honor the late, great Coach Bob Sanger and his wife and former teacher, Mrs. Linda Sanger. They both taught and coached at Britt and West Hancock for over 50 years, impacted thousands of lives. The Legacy Fund raises money to help the communities of Britt and Kanawha and the West Hancock schools and activities and athletics. Please consider going to sangerstrong.com and giving to the Legacy Fund. Every week, Bob, I challenge people to, quote, sponsor my podcast. You said you watch the other ones. I'm just encouraging people, if they sponsor it, by going to sangerstrong.com just to let me know, and I'll mention them on the next episode as kind of sponsors to help keep money flowing into that Legacy Fund and all the good things we're going to do there. So, all right, like I said, I have Bob Steenlidge. Bob, like I said, you're the first 4-time state champion in Iowa history, second in the nation to do that. After high school, Bob went to West Point. He was undefeated in 4 years in dual meets there. He beat the 3-time NCAA champion Mike Caruso. It was that guy's only high school or college loss. And in the book I've been reading that Bob sent me, he was mentioned in there many times. Bob was elected team captain by his teammates of the 66 team your last year there. That 66 team finished 10th in the NCAA tournament. That's their best ever finish in school history. Bob graduated from the U.S. Military Academy in West Point in 1966, graduated from Army Airborne and the Ranger schools, and then you went to Vietnam, or as a veteran of the Vietnam War. And you were telling me, Bob, just crazy how 1 of every 20 that you went to school with was killed, 1 of every 6 was wounded, and you and pretty much all others have PTSD from the war. Bob is married to his wife, Bobby, who I just met a minute ago. They have 8 children, which God bless you for surviving 8 children. I have 2 and don't know how the heck I'm surviving that. So kudos to you. His wife, Bobby, taught at Britt for a couple years from 63 to 1965. So again, welcome, Bob. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Dan. Thank you for the good job you're doing talking about Britt athletics.
Yep, I love it. Bob and I talked on the phone the other night to kind of get ready for this, and Bob asked me my motivation behind doing this, and I love my hometown. I love my school, and I don't even live there anymore. I'm 3 hours away, but I don't miss a game, on stream or in person. I just love Britt and I love West Hancock. So this is just a fun hobby for me and a way to raise awareness for the Legacy Fund. So Bob, you were born and raised in Britt your whole life, right? Or did you live somewhere?
Well, actually, excuse me, I make a small correction here.
Yeah.
I was actually born in Garner, and the reason for that was my great aunt lived in Garner. Her husband was gone for the war. And at the time that I was due, my father was sent to Italy to the war.
Okay.
So I was born on leap year, February 28th, 1944. Just a couple of days from now, I'll be 77. And so I was born in a house, a couple of houses from where the courthouse is. My mom lived with my great aunt till my dad got back from the war, which was almost 2 years. Then we moved back to Britt. Thank goodness, because Garner never had wrestling till decades later.
Yep. They honestly barely still have a wrestling team right now. They haven't been competitive for years, but yeah. So what was it like growing up in Britt in the 50s, early 60s?
It was actually a wonderful place to grow up. When I see all the things that have happened in the last couple of decades, we were blessed. They didn't have to lock the doors, and we were outside playing with our friends all the time. And Bill Peterson, Larry, and Lloyd and I were small children together from about 3 or 4 years old, and went all the way through high school. We're on the same state championship team, and so it was a great life. And my friend Bill Peterson, his father was a carpenter, and he always helped us make blow guns and all kinds of different things. In fact, he was a veteran of World War II as a Marine, and I think it was at Iwo Jima from what the story was told, but he's the one that actually helped me make my weights out of cement. We figured out what would be about 10 pounds and put them on a pipe, and I still have those weights today. So nice. It was great growing up Britt. Very, very many memories, and many of my classmates I talked with yet today.
Cool. What was there to do, like as a middle schooler and a high schooler? I mean, drive around town, or there restaurants to go to, or what do you guys do?
When we were young, we did a lot of camping out at Eagle Lake. That's when they drained the lake. Big controversy. There used to be a nice lake like Crystal Lake, and the powers to be had it drained. And back then, it was safe. We pack up our things on our bicycle and ride out to Eagle Lake on the highway and camp out there over the weekend. A lot of fun memories from that. And as we went down to high school, the Candy Kitchen was a big spot where people went and teenagers went to get their shakes and things like that. That was a gathering place. Of course, Hobo Day was a huge, huge event. So we walked to school. I remember when I was in elementary school, I lived not too far from the high school, a couple blocks up where Gene Gunther lives now, and remembering about 10 years old, hearing the roar down at the football field, hoping someday to be able to play football, not realizing from your interviews that they didn't do too well back then, and until Coach Everett came.
Yep, there was a lot of down years until Coach Everett came, and then average in between until Coach Sanger got there. Then he had some okay years, and then it took till about the mid 80s for things to really take off. So Getting into wrestling, junior high, I read about you. You did some exhibitions before high school matches. And then I know in your book, you said your goal in middle school, you set to become a 4-time state champion, right?
Yes, Bill Peterson and I were the managers of the varsity wrestling team. And we didn't have a B squatter for 95 pounds. So Coach Townley, my coach at that time, he checked with the state and asked if I could wrestle exhibition. So all my 8th grade year, I wrestled exhibition 95 pounder from the other school, and that helped a lot. But we never had wrestling before 7th grade, and Coach Townley came during my 7th grade year.
Okay. How'd you do in middle school, wins and losses wise?
Well, it was the only time that I never lost at least a match during the year.
Okay, nice. I got to give you my wrestling background right now, Bob. I didn't even tell you this on the phone. I went out for wrestling in 3rd grade because my friends went out. I had no idea what I was doing. I was pretty terrible at it. My parents said, well, since you went out, you need to go to that tournament, the Little Eagle Wrestling Tournament. I was wearing shorts, t-shirts, and tennis shoes and just hoping to get through the day quickly. And my first opponent was wearing boots, knee pads, singlet, elbow pads, and his dad was like shaking him, trying to get him all fired up to destroy his opponent. This kid could have pinned me in about 15 seconds, but his dad kept making him work on his takedowns and just practicing. Just wiped the floor with me. I had 2 more matches that day, but I had such a bad taste in my mouth from it. I got up, grabbed my stuff, went home, and didn't tell anybody. They were searching for me, looking for me, and then my dad realized he's probably sitting on the couch watching TV, and he was not happy with me. That was my first and only ever experience with wrestling. I'm 0-1, and I never got a chance to get to 500, but I like watching wrestling. I'm just not as knowledgeable about it. So I follow.
Nice story.
That's my experience. So yeah. So tell us about setting your goal to win 4 state titles. What
would you mind before we do that if we talk a little bit about Coach Everett before?
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I want to mention that, and then we go to wrestling if that's okay, because he had a big influence on my life, and he was a very good man, and I was always on second team offense unless somebody was hurt. But I started as an outside linebacker of 3 or 4 years, and I had him as a teacher, and he wrote recommendations for me for West Point, and I greatly respect him. And a couple quick stories about how good he was a coach and how determined and never fooled around is that I played on kickoffs. I was the last one if they broke through to tackle the person they got through.
Yep.
And it went pretty well, except the beginning of our senior year. And against Buffalo Center, this big guy got through, come down the field, hit him hard, and I couldn't hold on to him, and he got away. And Coach Everett, he's quick to make a decision. He called me off the field and said, Bob, you won't be playing that position anymore. Okay, coach. And so I lost that position out because of my mistake. And I remember one funny story I can tell about Coach Everett, that he didn't fool around. Of course, you couldn't get away with that now with the way the so-called standards are. And he taught 7th grade civics in the old school. That was the year that we went to the new school. And Larry Lloyd was doing something with his book. Larry Lloyd called me. The 5 on the state championship team our senior year, we all had our birthdays in February, and we always talked to each other. Of course, Bill Peterson has passed. But anyway, I talked to Larry the other day and talking about that. But anyway, he was doing something with his civics book that didn't fool around, according to Coach Everett. And Coach Everett just simply picked up a book, walked over to him, popped him on the head. And Larry was good the rest of the year as well as the class.
Yep.
So that's one of the fond memories. And I just want to show you a picture of the respect the whole school had for Coach Everett. This is our senior year, my 62 yearbook. And here's a picture of Coach Everett on the left. Nice. There.
That's cool.
And then there's another picture. he didn't throw me off the team because of my mistake. He would often ask me questions. So let's see, can you see in the
Yep,
picture right
that's
there?
perfect right there. Yep, looks good.
Yeah, he's got his arm around me and he's asking me some question I'm trying to explain to him. So anyway, he was a great coach, and I just wanted to give him recognition.
Yep, definitely. And I was telling you, he's a guy that, a lot of people didn't even know about. I didn't know about him when I was doing the Coach Sanger record book. It got brought to my
Sure.
attention by a relative of his, and he was a legend. I mean, he was an amazing coach, and I've talked to his son, and I've talked to you and some others, and people hold him in very high regard who had him as a teacher and coach. So it's
Right.
it's
And he
great to
wrote
hear some-
recommendations for West Point for me, and we rolled back and forth a couple times, and I congratulated him and went in the Coach of the Year and so forth. But back to wrestling now. I just didn't want to bypass
definitely.
that. So,
Yep, thanks for that.
excuse me. You asked an interesting question. How did it come about that myself was able to achieve 4 times, and how did that come about to setting a goal? So it's really started in when I was born in Garner, and February 28th, leap year, missed the 29th, was next day, because my dad at that time was on a ship to Italy. So he fought up through Italy, driving the Germans out of that country until he was wounded. So he was gone almost 2 years. So, and then I never had any brothers. My brother Les was 4 years younger. Jerry was 6 years younger, Nancy 10 years younger, and Cindy was 12 years younger. And so my dad was not there when I was born. And I was four years old before I had a sibling.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad had challenges, PTSD from the war, but nobody really explained to me what's going on. So we never got along very well. Mm-hmm. And it's natural for all children to want to be loved, to feel love from both parents. And so it was one of my greatest motivations was when I decided to go out for wrestling, and I thought wrestling might be my sport because I was smaller. That if I could just do a good job in wrestling, maybe my dad would love me. And if I could just win one more wrestling match, maybe he would love me. So in reality, Dan, that was one of the main keys for the success in wrestling, because I was driven for that love in the same way somebody's driven after a drug. It's that strong. And in elementary school, I felt very insecure. I wasn't very bright in school. I was backward. I couldn't answer questions in school very well. And I used to wonder how could kids know the answer, and I didn't. And I was in the worst reading group. And the next significant thing that happened that affected my wrestling goal was my 6th grade teacher, Miss Baker. She was from Clarion, and she later married somebody from Clarion, Harlan Pullman. And she's the mother of Keith Pullman, who ended up was a twin and ended up to be a national champion from UNI. And not that she had an influence on wrestling per se, but she obviously was a good mother. And she affected my life dramatically, Dan, from having some self-respect, from being in the worst reading group and until being in the top reading group by the end of the year. So there was a dramatic effect on how I felt about myself. Mm-hmm. And so because of my dad wanting his love and because of that teacher, things began to gel a little bit. And then I had a very mysterious thing happen, Dan, that doesn't happen all the time. Between my 6th grade and 7th grade year, I had a dream, and I can remember it just like yesterday. I worked on the farm as I was a kid, and Ed Kumsher, who's the brother of my grandmother, lived between Britt and Kanawha, and I used to go out there a lot. And then Art Nelson had a farm out there, and I used to work for him a lot out there. And then later in high school, I worked for the Jerry Fox farm northwest of Britt. But anyway, in this dream, I had a dream of being on Art Nelson's farm, and the tractor wasn't working. The mechanic came out and he adjusted the carburetor or something, and the tractor just popped right off. In the dream, there was not an audible voice, but it was just like somebody was just popping into my mind. And the first thing came in my mind, that humans are just like machines. they can be fixed, but they're fixed through their mind. How you think makes your hold a difference in life. It doesn't make a difference of your IQ, your ability, because most people are lazy. I'll never forget that part of the dream. Most people are lazy. All you got to do is outwork them.
Yep.
And some of these things in the dream became part of my life right away, and then it caused me to read about it and have an interest in it. Another thing that came to me was it's important to be thankful for everything, that no matter what came along. And that was significant in my life because as you'll ask me the question later, I had two coaches. Why did my one coach leave? And it was devastating. And so I learned how to be thankful for everything. And to today, as a result of that impact and all the reading I've done in the area, I write down at least 10 things a day that I'm thankful for, including things that are wrong in my life, because eventually they either get resolved by trying to be thankful for them, or you find a solution to them. Also, in that dream, it came up to me about being kind to people. Kind, you need to be kind, and you should do at least one good deed a day. And these things are hard to explain. I'm looking back 65 years to when I was in 6th grade, when I had that dream. And it's almost like looking at somebody else. How did those things have an effect on me so much that in a matter of a year or so, going from a backward student that couldn't answer questions in class to all of a sudden, as a 7th grader, telling my mother and my grandmother, whom I love very much, and they promised to keep it quiet, that I was going to set a goal to be a state champion 4 years in a row. And that's how it all started. And another thing was when my teacher, my 6th grade teacher, praised me for being in the top reading group. I like that. Who doesn't like to be praised?
Yep.
It's horrible being made fun of. If anybody got made fun of in elementary school or whatever, high school, I always stuck up for them no matter what. But to be praised, it was also like a drug, Dan. I like to be praised. And I thought, oh, I want to be somebody in life. I can play football, I can run track, but I'm not very fast and I'm not very big. But maybe in wrestling, I could be somebody. And it was like a drug to me. I was driven. And as I look back now, as all the things that we'll share here shortly that you're going to ask about, I had to have that kind of drive. Otherwise, I throw in the towel. But that's the basic background, how it came about.
Yeah, so with that said, let's dig into your freshman year. Well, before that, actually, just give people, what was it like in the program? I mean, did you have a lot of kids out? You talked about your coaches a little bit. How tough were practices? Can you kind of give us just like the behind the scenes?
Sure.
Of the Britt wrestling program back then? Coach
Townley was a lightweight. He wrestled at Iowa State, and he was an alternate on the Olympic team. In 7th grade, they used to, I had heard that the varsity used to, in the old school, practice on the stage, and they get thrown off the stage and so forth. But during my 7th grade year, one day they called off half a day of school, and farm kids brought their pickups in, and they loaded the books up for the old high school, the elementary school, and took them down to the new school. Instead of a stage to practice on, they had a nice wrestling room. And the size was much smaller, but it's doubled now. So we had a good wrestling room. And Coach Townley was a very, very, very dedicated coach. And he was there my 7th through 11th grade. And very, very dedicated, highly respected in the whole state. And my freshman year, our team took 4th. Sophomore year, we were undefeated as a team, even beat East Waterloo, and ended up taking, there was Class A and B then, ended up taking 2nd in Class B to Cresco, and East Waterloo, who we beat, takes 1st in Class A. And I'll never forget one of the wrestlers from Waterloo, East Waterloo, said after the meet out in the hallway, he says, I just can't understand it. Our bus is about as long as your Main Street. Where do you get all these wrestlers from? We said, we just dig them up someplace,
Yep.
So anyway, that's a couple things. And Coach Townley was a very good coach, very good coach.
Did he wrestle with you guys in practice?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, wrestled a lot
Cool.
with us. And he was very inspirational and taught us a lot. We weren't pinners or anything like that. You could ride more back then.
Mhm.
He taught us the fundamentals, and it was a very good coach. And we probably had 30, well, we had a full B squad, except for 95 pounder, full A squad, and maybe another 10. So we had at least 30 some out. And when I was a freshman, I had to beat out a senior and for the varsity. And that was another thing based on what I just said. It almost seems, how did it happen that being in elementary school and having a poor self-concept, when most freshmen are thinking about maybe making B squad and maybe making A squad, I'm thinking about being a state champion.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about this. I marvel at that as I look back, how that could actually happen. But anyway, Coach Townley was a great motivator, and we had good athletes.
Cool. Yeah. So this is the 1959 season we're talking about. You wrestled at 95 pounds. What I found in my research and through your book, you won the state title match 2-0 against Ron Jones of Iowa Falls. Do you remember, like, leading up to that match, how you got, districts to state and leading up to the title match?
Yeah, Ron and Don Jones were twins from Iowa Falls and from the farm, and I wrestled them both. And I know I lost to Don one time. And Ron went on to wrestle Iowa State and took third in the NCAA tournament in 1965 at Wyoming, when Iowa State upset Oklahoma State. And about 5 years ago, Ron passed away of some unknown disease, I don't know, but I still stay in contact with Don Jones, his twin brother. So we became pretty good friends because a lot of the Iowa colleges were made up of wrestlers from Northern Iowa. And one of the reasons that Northern Iowa had such good wrestling over the rest of the state is that Frank Gotch, who's from Humboldt, was a professional wrestler. And back when Teddy Roosevelt was president, and professional wrestling was not fake or anything, it was for real. And Teddy Roosevelt had him come to the White House for a wrestle match. And he was as well known as Muhammad Ali was as a boxer later in life. And Frank Gotch passed away in his early 30s. Mike Chapman, who wrote my book, Fighting Back, he and others, myself, went over there and dedicated a statue to Frank Gotch. But anyway, I think that's one of the main reasons that Northern Iowa started wrestling, is because Frank Gotch was an international person like Muhammad Ali, who happened to be from Humboldt, Iowa.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'm friends with a lot of the wrestlers from Clarion and Humboldt and Iowa Falls and Elgona and so forth. Some of
Maple Grove, Crestwood, Osage. There was a lot of traditional powers back then.
Tom Peckham at Hall of Fame events from Crestwood. Yes.
I put in my notes in my thing, kind of teasing you a little bit, but 95 pounds as a freshman, I think that was me in second grade. I just can't even picture that, a 95 pounder. You get pretty scrappy, I bet.
Well, I didn't weigh 95 pounds. I weighed probably 105 pounds. So at that time, you could weigh in at the beginning of the year and move up a weight during the season.
Okay.
During the season, I wrestled up a weight all year long, up a weight. And then by the end of the season, they added 2 pounds for each month. Yep. So by the time the end of the season, I didn't have to cut down to 95. It was 97, 99, 101. I could wrestle 95 pounds. Okay. But I was pretty small.
Was it mostly freshmen wrestling in that weight division? Freshmen, sophomores, probably?
Not really. There were a lot of juniors and seniors too. Okay. I remember wrestling the 95 pounder that I think from East Waterloo. And we tied in that match. He had won state the year before, and I had won state in 95. And anyway, we were both at 1 of 3 then. But anyway, he was a junior, and they have a tendency in the lighter weights to be younger, but not necessarily, just depending on build.
Yep. And then I saw also that you guys had another state champ that year. I don't know how to say his last name. Larry.
High
Did you
House.
say High House? Okay. I
That's the
would
way you
not guess
pronounce it.
that.
Yeah, Larry was a pretty well-known person. He was a great football player, and they had big articles about him, and then in the papers and stuff about how he used to camp out in the middle of the winter and so forth. And his dad was in World War II. But anyway, Larry and I were good friends, and he wrestled, took state at heavyweight on his junior year, and then Paul Smith came out for wrestling, and he was going to fill that weight. 165, we had another 54 pounder, and then so instead of Larry is going to be the 54 pounder, and we had somebody as heavyweight, so Larry cut down to one, so he could wrestle 154 or 165. I can't remember. So he was a very small heavyweight, but he was really good. And I'll just tell you a coincidence.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can't remember what you had to weigh them, but they had no limit on how big you could be, and I don't think they even had a rule that you had to weigh 165 or something. If the coach put you on the mat, within reason, they would go. One little coincidence about Larry Highhouse is about maybe 20 years ago, he remarried, and he married somebody from Oklahoma. Anyway, I was putting out all kinds of motivational stuff, and this woman his new wife was reading about some of these inspirational things I put out. And Larry says, I mean, this is many years later. He said, that sounds like somebody I grew up with. And she asked my name. He asked her the name, and I said, yes. Anyway, Larry married the mother of a West Point coach at West Point after I left. And they're still together down in Oklahoma. Come to my Facebook site. So anyway, Larry and I are still good friends today.
Good. All right, let's move on to your sophomore year. And I was thinking just the other day, I didn't put this in our notes, but you had to have had a lot of pressure on you as a senior after you've won 3 straight state titles. I can imagine you had a lot of pressure, probably more intrinsically yourself after your freshman year, because if you don't win state your freshman year, that whole goal you set for yourself can't physically happen. I mean, so what kind of pressure did you feel after that first year, during that first freshman year, that first title run? Did you have a lot of pressure, or was it just kind of?
I really did not, because I was driven. I mean, every time I walked on the mat, I believed I could win, because I knew in my heart I'd run more laps, threw more bales of hay, lifted more weights than my opponent, followed the rules. I knew that because not everybody did that, and so I had the belief. And so what I'm going to share with you is a very significant thing, that this freshman and sophomore and junior year was not as much pressure as could be. But for what I was lacking in those years, just blossomed into a atomic mushroom my senior year. And how that came about, and you and I were talking about this, is that when I went for football practice my senior year, my wrestling coach, who was like my surrogate father, 7th grade through my junior year, I'm going to go through to try to set this record and win state again. He was not there. There was a new man that took his place by the name of Jim Craig, who was a national champion at 190 or 175 or something at Iowa. He was a new football coach. So here I am, my surrogate father. I'm going for the last year. The coach never told me. Nobody from the school told me. No parent told me. My mom didn't know. Nobody let us know. So it was devastating. I can't even put into words how devastating it was. And if I had not had that mental training up to then, that could have wiped me out. I mean, it's like my surrogate father. My own father was having problems from the war and so forth. So that was devastating. But somehow I came out of that and got to know Coach Craig. And Coach Craig was actually better for me than Coach Townley was, if that's possible. He was an equally good coach, and then he was good for me off the mat. Coach Craig was much more personable that way outside of the wrestling room, and I got to know his wife and family and through events and so forth. But as it turns out, and this is a very significant thing that happened, if it wasn't, and here's another reason to be thankful for bad things, because if Coach Townley had not left and Coach Craig had not come in, I never would have won it the fourth time. I never would have. And I know that in my heart, and somebody may question that, but after I tell you what things that went on, you might understand, and I'll try to tell this briefly, but this is a significant part of this whole thing, is that when Coach Townley left and Coach Craig came in, he told me, and his wife told me later, that the school board said, well, you're bigger, make sure you don't hurt him in practice, and you're going to change things. And so he said no. Well, one day in January, my senior year, I begged him to go take downs, and without thinking, I went up and hurt my back. Yep. And we had, that was on a Monday, and we had Osage the next day at Osage. And Ron Barker, who was the top man in my weight besides myself, I had him in the match. And I was in pain, but I didn't tell the coach how bad a pain it was. Anyway, I ended up losing 9-8 in that match. And I was in so much pain, Dan, and I was delirious. When I walked off the mat, I walked over to the wrong bench. I remember the core guy, he was a coach, the Osage coach, very gently turned me around and pointed me back to the bench. So I was out of it. And then Coach Craig found out that how bad it was and I shouldn't have wrestled. But that was my fault. Well, the next day I went to see Dr. Shaw. And Dr. Shaw is the one that fixed my broken nose in football. And he would stick that rod up there when you broke your nose and say, hold on to the chair, and that rod and go around, and the tears are coming down. So he was an old time arguing me doctor, and he wasn't that used to the x-rays. And so he x-rayed me, and he came out and said flatly, sorry, Bob, you'll never wrestle again. He said, you'll never wrestle again. When I heard that, Dan, it's like I never heard it. It was like water off a duck. It wasn't, he was always a good doctor, always helped me, but I didn't believe it. It was just, I don't believe it. And I walked out of there, and I walked out the door, and I'm all bent over. And across the road was Dr. Peterson, chiropractor. People didn't like chiropractors very much back then, but I said, I'm going there. I went there, he x-rayed me, and he was younger and more educated on x-rays. He said, you have a serious injury, but you cannot hurt yourself if you can stand the pain. Eventually over time, I never had any problem with my back from that injury and so forth, but I was in severe pain. I missed 10 days of practice for the first time in 6 years. I ever missed a day of practice. I had a soak in the bathtub. There was no whirlpools and so forth. Came back 10 days before the tournaments, and you're going to lose some shape in that time. So I went into the tournaments, and it was difficult. Yep. It was difficult wrestling that part, and then the newspapers got a hold of it, and people said he's never going to do it. He's never going to do it. It cannot happen. Impossible, too much pressure. And something that was devastating too, that Coach Craig helped me. There were two fathers that just, and one of them later, 3 years later, apologized, started spreading around Britt that I was stuck up and I was a proud, cocky person. And I wasn't like that at all. I was very shy and reserved. And that about did me. And that's where Coach Craig really came in. If it hadn't been for him, I never would have made it through that happening with somebody doing something like that. But anyway, I went into the tournaments, not knowing I wasn't in good shape, had to depend more on my thinking and so forth. And I remember Jack Rubenthal from Clarion, a good friend of mine after wrestling. He passed away a couple of years ago from Clarion. I wrestled him all through high school. In the Eagle Grove tournament, I pinned him in the Eagle Grove tournament. Later in the year at the sectional tournament or the district tournament at Clarion, I won on riding time. So that was a significant difference. Mm-hmm. Then in the semifinals, I had to wrestle Ron Barker from Osage, who had beat me 9-8. That match ended up in 7-5, just barely won. But something happened in that match, Dan, where I hurt my shoulder. It so happens that the Iowa State coach, Coach Nichols, was the referee in my semifinals. And he talked to Coach Craig and said, you better not take him out to eat because his shoulder is going to stiffen up and the referees might start questioning and so forth. So I just rolled around with some sweats. They brought some food to me. And so I didn't freeze up and tighten up for the finals. And so the referees didn't notice anything. It turned out the next day when I got x-rayed that I actually had a wrestle in the finals with a separated shoulder.
Jeez.
But anyway, I wrestled Steve Bossbaum from Perry, Iowa.
Yep.
And never talked to him after that match until 2012, when he retired from being an engineer, and he said, what do people do when they retire? They think about the wrestling matches they shouldn't have lost. He called me 50 years later. But anyway, he told me in that match, his senior year, any time that he was on top, no one ever got away. They sometimes on takedowns or something. Anyway, the match was 2-2 going into the final period, and he was down, and I had a separated shoulder, which I didn't know. And I'm going to just share you what happened. Some people may think I'm crazy, but this did actually happen. I had really grip from lifting weights and pulling cockleburrs and chopping corn and so forth, but I couldn't hold on to his ankle. And twice, Dan, his ankle would go out from my hand. And I thought, this is it. He's going to stand up or sit up, but he didn't. That happened 3 times, and his ankle come back. It came back. Well, anyway, when I talked to him 50 years later, I asked him, I said, do you remember that? He said, yes, I do. He said, no one ever got out. I mean, he said that I always got out. I maybe said that wrong earlier. I always got out when I was down. And, but anyway, he said he remembered that, and the coach remembered it. And he said it did happen. He said it was a mysterious thing that he couldn't get out. And I just share that story for what it's worth, because people ask me about it now, and I just say, I think that was meant to happen, because I've told that story to thousands of people all over the country, to businesses, to prisons, to corporations, and schools and colleges and elementary schools and so forth. And it's inspired people. So I believe in my heart that was one of the reasons that I won. And I learned over time, when a person is kind to other people, doesn't mock them, always encourages them, always is thankful, that you get your breaks in life. There's several times in life that I could have been killed or permanently injured in a wheelchair. And I really believe that the kindness and being thankful was there. And then here's where Coach Craig comes in. I was hurting so bad, I found out that you can stand more pain to help somebody else than you can yourself. So I kept thinking that all that last period, when I'm in this pain, I got to win this for Coach Craig. I got to win this for Coach Craig. I got to win this for Coach Craig. His wife told me, she said, he just couldn't take it if you don't win, because it was his fault. And so the whole time I was thinking in that match, and it helped with the pain. And that was one of the differences. If Townley had been there, the pressure was so great. I just know in my heart I couldn't have done it. So anyway, the match ended, and they had writing time back then. And I knew it would be close. And of course, the tournament kind of slowed down, and people are watching this thing. And they brought out an extra judge for the match. It didn't happen then. And they went back, the referee went back. And he never came back and never came back. They talked about it. They checked this clock and checked that clock. It's so important. Here they come back, and I'm watching the referee's eyes as he's coming back to see if I could see any indication. And he simply walks over to me and leans over, grabs my hand and says, son, congratulations. You just won the state championship for the 4th time by 1 second. And he grabs my arm, my separated shoulder arm, stretches it up, and pain shot from my fingers all the way down to my feet. The tears are coming, and I look over at my teammates, my rough, tough teammates. Never saw them cry there before. Oh, the tears are coming down. And my coach is just beside himself. And then my teammates and I, we went out in the hallway, and they start to make an announcement. and the announcer said, "This is in the old gym at UNI." And the announcer says, "For the first time in the history of the world." And then he says, "No, not the world, Iowa." He says, "So for the first time in the history of Iowa, somebody's won the state championship for the first time." And I heard him say, "Oh, somebody from Pennsylvania won it last year." And actually, Mike Johnson from Pennsylvania did win it the year before. And I wrestled him 3 years later in the finals of the Easterns, two four-time state champions, and got to take down the last thing. But anyway, they make that announcement. And then my teammates and everybody, somebody come out and got us, we got to go back into the stadium, into the gym. And they never enforced the fire rule back there, Dan. They packed that thing. They had them in the rows.
Yeah.
They were hanging practically from the rafters. And then they make that announcement. And everybody stands up and starts clapping. Here, as a youngster, I felt so inadequate. And now these wonderful things have happened to me. How could that happen? And it felt so good not to be a nobody. And I looked up, saw my mom and my grandmother. My mom never missed one wrestle meet in all the years, 6 years. If she had to wash clothes, she had to clean somebody's house, whatever it took. If she had to beg for a ride, no matter the snowstorm, she was always there. And my grandmother was like a second mother to me. And when we had financial problems, my grandmother went to Chicago suburb, Oak Park, and lived in a one-room apartment, community bath, and so forth, and spent a lot of the money to help buy her a car and a house. And she didn't like wrestling because she didn't like her little grandson getting hurt. My grandmother got on a plane 4 years in a row, flew back to Iowa, sat there with my mother with her coat over her head and said, is he okay? Is he okay? And once in a while she'd peek out, and there's my mom and grandmother, and it's a moment that I'll never forget. And every push-up, every day of practice, every sacrifice was worth it, because wrestling is like life. When you walk on the mat, nobody's there to hold your hand. It set the stage for my life. So if it hadn't been for my father going off to war, if it had been for my sixth grade teacher, if it had been for that dream, and I had teachers in school that had a profound effect on me. My seventh grade teacher, Cloris Anderson Robinson, died a few years ago in Belmont. One of my wrestling coaches. Oma Shodi, a math teacher who's 10 years older than me. We talk almost the other day. She called the other day and said, "Could you get a hold of Larry McGurk?" Because Larry McGurk was in the car with us in 1961 when we went down in the blizzard to the state tournament. We're going 20 miles an hour and one has their head out and the other way and so forth. So they had a huge effect on my life.
Cool.
And,
I'm a teacher, so it's always neat for me to hear how teachers impact people and people still remember them all these years later. So that's pretty neat to hear.
I'll share one more thing about Miss Baker, if I could.
Yeah, definitely.
I put on my website, it's important to thank people from the past, and I thanked all my teachers, but I had never looked up Miss Baker, who was Mrs. Pullman. Well, in 2018, when I gave a talk at Britt, we have a video of that if anybody wants it. It was next to the library and the auditorium there. But anyway, she said she and her husband were going to come down. I called her on the phone and said I wanted to thank her. So we went to Gene Gunther's and we talked about it and so forth. And then I mentioned her in the talk and told her what an effect she had. And she kept saying, "I don't know how that happened. I don't remember having much effect." I said, "You did." And anyway, a year later after that, she passed away. So it always is worthwhile to thank the people that helped you.
Yeah, definitely. So we kind of scooted ahead to your senior year, which is fine. Just real quick to recap your middle seasons. Your sophomore year, I got to turn my page here. Your sophomore year in 1960, you, like you said earlier, your team were runner-ups in the state. You won your match 4-0. You're only 10 points away from winning. Then your junior year, to kind of keep scooting ahead and get back to your senior year, you guys won state as a team. That you were the first wrestling team in Britt history to win the state championship. 61, 62, And then I believe 71, 72, and 73, Britt also won state, plus a whole bunch of runner-ups. What was that like winning that state team championship for the first time? How'd that feel?
Now I'm going to back up a little bit and to fully tell that story.
Yeah.
When I grew up in 7th grade, first time associated with wrestling, I heard about Chuck Conway, who was a state champion, Ellen Hiscox was a state champion, and John Hiscox, who took second. And I'm forgetting the name now, the coach at Davenport at that time, I'll think of it. Anyway, he's the one that started wrestling at Britt in the 40s.
Okay.
And sometime I have to tell you how wrestling actually started at Britt. It was Forrest Reeves-Simon, who works at the bank, who went to the superintendent that talked him into started wrestling in the late 40s. And Bill Reeves-Simon, who was on that team in 1956, told me the story once, and so it's going to be part of Britt wrestling lore. But anyway, I lost my train of thought here. What was your question again?
The guy starting wrestling, the program, and getting to your first state championship.
Oh yeah, right. And anyway, back to the 1956. Anyway, the story that went around that was true, that John Hiscox lost in the finals.
Yep.
And a mistake by the referee. If John Hiscox had won, Britt would have been a state championship team.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard that.
So I kept going back to 1961, I remember that, and it was a great feeling. And we had a great group of guys, and they worked very hard and they were dedicated. And our senior year was Larry Lloyd, and at 103, two-time state champion. And then I was at 20 my senior year, and then Bill Peterson was at 27. And then we had Gene Gunther was at 33, I think it was, and he took third, and Dale Birchka took third. But anyway, we had 2 firsts and 2 thirds. And all of our birthdays were in February. And so through the years, we always called each other, and the birth of Gene Gunther and Dale Birchka the first week of February. Bill Peterson was on Lincoln's birthday. Larry Lloyd was on Washington's birthday, and then I was on the 28th. And we couldn't talk to Bill this year, but we all talked to each other.
Speaking of Gene Gunther, have you ever had his wife's cookies, Julie's cookies that she makes? She's famous for. Amazing.
I could tell you stories about that. When we go down to Britt, which isn't often, but Gene and I are very, very, very close. Yep. And Gene lost his mother during his junior year during the middle of wrestling season.
Okay.
Since that point, Gene and I have been very close, like brothers. And whenever I was going through struggles after Vietnam and so forth, Gene would always call. And so when we're in Britt, it's the Gunthers and the cookies.
Oh yeah, she gave me a bucket full of them at Hobo Days last year when I was handing out the football record books I created, and I think I ate like 16 of them that day or something like that. It's crazy. So talking about you being a 4-time state champion, I just want to give people some perspective on how amazing of a feat this is. I had to change the number on the sheet because a guy just won his 4th this last week. So only 28 other wrestlers have done what you did, winning 4 state titles. And that spans, since you've done it, 60 some years. So only in 60 some years, only 28 guys besides you have done that. And then 93 people have done it 3 times. So there's a lot of people out there that were one away. And when I didn't do a full study into this, but a lot of them won it their sophomore, junior, and senior years. So that freshman year, I think, is almost the most difficult because you've never been to state before. You don't have that experience like you do when you're older. I thought that was pretty cool. And Britt also has three-time state champions. John Hagen, Brent Hagen, and Mark Stevenson all won 3. So a pretty elite crew between you and those guys. And there's a total of 47 wrestlers from Britt. We have 47 individual state champions in our school history. So that's pretty darn cool. And then 12 of those 93 came before you. So there was 12 guys that were really close to winning that 4th that never actually did it and then you did it. You were the first one. So
well, somebody didn't win it until 17. Jeff Kerber Emmitsburg won it 17 years later.
Yep.
An interesting story was Dan Gable and I were good friends. I was 4 years older than him, so I was kind of somebody he looked up as a wrestler and so forth. But anyway, last time we were together, he said, only one of the things that I'm missing besides losing to Owens in the finals of my senior year, he said, I wanted to be a 4-time state champion, which he would have been if he could have wrestled. He said, could you check that out for me? And of course, if Dan Gable asked you to do something, you say, no, I don't have time, Dan. I said, sure. So I checked it out, and the school in Waterloo was 7th, 8th, and 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't allow him. Otherwise, Dan would have done it 4 years later, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yep. And let's jump ahead to that. I wanted to talk to you about your relationship with Dan Gable, because who doesn't know who Dan Gable is? How well do you know him? What are your interactions with him?
I first got to know him when my brother last was assistant AD at Iowa for 30 some years. They were hired at the same time by the coach prior to Gable. I can't think of his name now. I know him well. But anyway, I used to go to the practice, go to practice when I was giving talks in the area, and I was in Iowa City, and so I got to know Dan really well by watching practice. We used to go to a lot of the tournaments, and so Dan and I became friends that way. And then over the years, he and I have just talked more and more as we've gotten older, and often visited or invited down to his museum and things like that. So Dan and I are close friends. And
and there's the Dan Gable Museum, and then every year, correct me if I don't say this right, but the award for the best Iowa high school wrestler is actually named after you. And there's an awards thing at the Gable Museum, or is it some combination of that?
The idea came out of the Gable Museum, and so they give the award every year. I think starting 5 or 6 years ago, they asked if they could use my name to give the award. So that's how it started. And in my book, Fighting Back, which anybody wants, we can get a copy for you. But Dan Gable is the first one on the back that writes something there. So anyway, we don't pick up the phone and talk stuff like that, regularly anyway, but we're good friends.
Yeah, Dan Gable doesn't come across to me as a phone chatter type of guy.
No.
But was he, I mean, you always saw him on TV coaching. He was kind of that mean, gruff, crusty old guy. I mean, was that kind of just him in general, or is he a nice, laid back guy just outside of the wrestling world?
Well, he's very dedicated to the sport of wrestling. Mm-hmm. And as much as I was dedicated to winning it 4 times for all the reasons I talked about, he's dedicated to wrestling, to save the sport. It almost was canceled in the Olympics. And he had a big statement the other day, about 2 weeks ago. He plainly said, girls wrestling could be the thing that saves boys wrestling at the Olympic level, high school and college. So that he's very focused on saving wrestling. But at the same time, he's very personable. When the last Cresco Hall of Fame we had before the pandemic, he and his wife are there, and they go around and talk to people and everything. So he was very shy at first and had a hard time talking, but developed to a great speaker, and he's very dedicated. And he won the presidential award, which is not just given to anybody off the wall. And he's dedicated. He's dedicated. During this pandemic, he had constant calls from people, and he was doing videos and so forth. So he's driven to help people. But wrestling is his goal.
Yep, cool. So let's move on to after Britt. Like I said in your intro, you went to West Point and wrestled there. Can you kind of share some of your experiences that you experienced there at West Point?
Sure. I got a letter my junior year from the wrestling coach at West Point, who was named Leroy Alex, who's originally from the Mason City area. And he was the head coach at Osage in the 1956, if I remember correctly. From being a high school coach, he was picked to be the West Point head coach. And Coach Terry Lehman from Osage was the coach at Lehigh. And there was a Penn State coaches from Iowa, and a lot of coaches went out east. And so he wrote me a letter about coming to West Point. And you may have a hard time believing this, but I was so dedicated to wrestling and getting grades, and I was just in this little bubble that I had not, and I didn't do a lot of reading outside of what I was required. I never heard of West Point. This is 1961. TV's just come out. What's West Point? So he told me all about it. Then he said, if you can qualify, you get a free education. Wow, free education. Well, I found out later that I could have, later in high school, that I could have got scholarships at several colleges. But Coach Alex was such a good man. And I have right here an interesting thing I'll just show you really quick. Coach Alex sent me this postcard from Berlin, East and West Berlin. And he wrote me this postcard telling me that I had just been accepted to West Point. That's well, the address is April 20th, 1962. So it was kind of hard to turn it down. And wrestling was a lot harder there because you were in the military, and the plebe or freshman system was very difficult. So it was much more difficult wrestling at West Point because you had to put up with all the other military things. And, they didn't have it convenient for dieting and things like that. And academics were very hard for me. It was just, a lot of my classmates had gone to college for a year or two, had been in the military, and I wasn't a very gifted student, and I was an overachiever. So I almost flunked out 4 times, and it was very, very difficult. It was so strict. If you flunked a semester, I flunked a semester in English once because I couldn't express myself, and then some physics and engineering class and so forth. But anyway, they sent a letter to your parents saying your son flunked a semester and he's got 10 days to study for a test. And a Saturday, it's going to be a 4.5-hour test. If he passes, he stays. If he flunks, he's coming home. To make a difference if you're captain of the wrestling team or not. So that's called pressure. And I just brought something along that I thought would be of interest. Back then, they didn't have calculators. They had slide rules. So this is my slide rule for my engineering classes. And if no one ever used them, it's a lot harder than using a calculator. 4 different times I had to take re-exams, and fortunately made it through. So it was a lot of pressure. However, the things I learned at West Point, I wouldn't have learned other places. I can't put into the words the strictness and how they develop you. It was very, very hard. You were graded academically, which I was low in. You were graded in physical education, and I was really high on that. In fact, I was number one, they told me I was number 1 in my class in reaction. And that was one thing that helped me in wrestling. And then you got graded on the military part, which I was in the upper third. Academically, I was really low. And, but the friends that I have that are still alive are special people, and the sacrifices they made for this country. 1 out of every 20, as you said, was killed. 1 out of every 6 wounded remained. And one of my classmates was responsible, along with somebody else, for getting the Vietnam Wall built and so forth. And a lot of fond memories. And for my 50th reunion, the children, or 8 children, and their spouses, and all the children, they all wanted to go back. Some hadn't seen it, so we all go back for the 50th reunion. And they got to see everything, see the parades, and got to see the Statue of Liberty in New York. And so it was something that the only thing that made it difficult was the Vietnam War, which we didn't know about when we first went there.
Yeah. By the time you were kind of midway through at West Point, is that when the war was kind of starting? And
yeah, about first of all, Kennedy was killed when we were there. Yep. And Kennedy had spoken at graduation. In 1962, after I graduated from Britt, the coach invited me out to hear Kennedy speak at the seniors in June that were graduating. And that was an unbelievable experience.
I bet.
And another thing I'll just add in there, if Kennedy had not been killed, we wouldn't have gone to Vietnam, because he and his brother Robert had just signed a form, or whatever it's called, to get us out of Vietnam. But the politicians within a day, Lyndon Johnson said, we're going to go into Vietnam, basically for money and so forth. So I've studied Kennedy, walked where he was killed, and you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. So you talked about all the pressure of your school and wrestling and all that stuff. When you knew there was I mean, that's added pressure, I'm sure, knowing that you might be going to war too, and you know, at some point in time. I just can't imagine that type of pressure. That would be a tough thing to get.
Excuse me, somebody was just asking about the other day, so it's fresh in my mind, and I can just tell you, I went to Vietnam with my wife 6 months pregnant. The medical doctor had given her a drug when she was pregnant. He was not supposed to. Normally during birth, the birth canal, the head collapses, or there's a soft spot. The drug caused our son's head to be firm. She's small. She almost died of childbirth. Because of the drug, I got a Red Cross message in March of 1968. He'll be 53. He was born with a cleft lip, a cleft gum because of that drug. And then when he was 3 months old, because his head was frozen together like that, it wasn't growing with his head. The brain and the skull were going to touch, going to cause brain damage. They brought me home for emergency life or death surgery. They took a strip of bone, 1.25 inches wide, 7 inches long, off the top of his head from here to here, put a piece of plastic in, sewed it up. Every time he breathed, that big of a gap would go down and touch his brain. And they tell me not to make sure he doesn't hit his head. Then they send me back to Vietnam. When I was on that plane, Dan, I thought about going to Canada.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. I knew this war is a bunch of baloney. People are dying because of politicians. And, you know, a lot of people may not agree with me, but that's how I felt. But can I be the first West Pointer to desert? It was a thought. But I went back and fortunately made it home. And then when our son was 2.5 years old, a drunk hit us. I got a coaching job, a head wrestling coach and teacher, math and science at Redwood Falls, Minnesota. A drunk hit us that fall. Our son broke the windshield with the top of his head. Jeez. And he was 2.5. And prior to that, he would say, "Good night, Mommy and Daddy." After that, he said goodbye. And the doctors said he's probably going to die. Bobby almost had a nervous breakdown and so forth. But he came out of it. He got inspired. And because of a negative again, he got inspired and went to medical school at Yale and was an orthopedic surgeon, all because of all this bad stuff happened.
Wow.
Inspired.
It's crazy. So how long were you in Vietnam then total? I
was there a year. Went in 15th of December of 1967. And the first thing I was assigned to was with the 4th Infantry Division. I was assigned to help prepare for the Bob Hope show. He almost got shot down by a rocket when he was flying into Pleiku. That was in December of 67. And then on January 1st, 1968, I got sent to the field. And the first night I was out, we got overrun and I was almost killed 2 weeks after I got there. And then the Tet Offensive came. And so it was a rough year.
I bet. I can't, like I said, I can't even imagine. That's out of my realm of understanding what you guys probably went through. And obviously I want to be very sensitive in asking this, but what are some things you can tell us about your time over there that you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. I could not talk about it till January of 2018. 4 of our 5 sons took me back to Vietnam for 2 weeks. And we went to all the battle sites. And I talked to families of soldiers that we fought with, either had died in the fighting or had died of overdose. They drink strong rice wine. But I talked to families. One of the families took me out with their family member fought and so forth. So I met 3 families that, anyway, they all said, we have nothing against the American soldier. We could have been friends on the street. We have PTSD, they have PTSD. They said it was your government, it was our government, it was Russia, and it was China. They literally hated China because of pushing them in that war. And then the war ended in 75, and in 1979, China invaded Vietnam, and Vietnam forced China out. And today, Vietnam is a very stabilizing force in that region against China, communist China. Even though Vietnam is communist, it's totally different from China, and they have total access to the internet, so they know what's going on. So today, the people love the United States. Not all the stuff's going on now, but the free enterprise system, because they learn. And so I stay in contact with people we met over there, and I met some soldiers that fought in the war. On our side, they were Vietnamese. So it was a wonderful experience, and it helped a lot. And when we got back from Vietnam, it was horrible. They spit on us. They threw vomit on us, called us baby killers. It was so bad, Dan, that some of the posts, if anybody wanted to go and leave for the weekend, they recommended getting a wig or something, so they didn't know they were in the military. I remember one particular story that the American soldier, young man, lost his arm, and when he got back, his parents and his wife's parents were so excited to have him back, and they went out to eat in a restaurant of all places in San Francisco. And this lady come up and said, "What happened to your arm?" And the father-in-law said, "My son-in-law fought for this country and he lost his arm in Vietnam." And the waitress comes up and spits in his face and said, "It's too bad you came back alive." And it was devastating because they did not prepare us for that. But I'll just tell you about one thing that happened in Vietnam. January 1st, 1968, I was sent to this isolated site, and it wasn't very big, and maybe a block in diameter. And we got overrun at midnight. And I grabbed my M16 and my radio. I'm crawling out along the sandbags. Flares are going on. For 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds, it's like daylight, then it's pitch dark again. One of the flares went off, and ready to call in and help if we needed them. And 15 feet away from it was a VC with an M16 holding just like this. And he saw me. And before the flare went out, he started pointing like that. So I'm there with my M16 beside me, pulling it up, trying to get it in position to shoot. And the flare goes off. And he makes the motion to pull the trigger, and I'm grimacing like that, just like in a car or when a deer runs in front of you. This is it. And all of a sudden, American soldier 15 feet to my right opens up with his M16 just a split second before he pulled the trigger and hit right across the forehead. And so when you see things like that, when you think like that happen, then you see the results that night in the morning, you're never the same. It's like being in a car accident or 50 car accidents where things like that happen. And I'm very thankful to be alive. And one of the things that helps me is to be able to try to encourage somebody else not to give up in life. And that's one of the reasons I talk about writing down things that you should be thankful for every day, and write down things that should try to be thankful for the bad things too, because they work around for good sometimes. And then to do at least one kind of deed a day, and that helps me a lot. And you're asking me to do this interview is good for me too, because maybe we can encourage somebody tonight.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, it's not just about sports. It's a lot of great life lessons that can be had. So thanks for sharing that stuff. And I know that's not an easy thing to share about. So you leave Vietnam. Tell me about, you have 8 kids. Tell me about, kind of from Vietnam to present day, what you've been doing. Where you
Okay. When I got out, my wife's in Waterville, Minnesota, and we met when she went to college with Al DeLeon at Mankato State. So she followed the wrestle team and so forth. So Al came the year after I left, was assistant coach for Jim Craig. Jim Craig left after 2 years at Britt, and Al became the head coach.
Yep.
A year later after I graduated. And my wife then graduated from Mankato State in 63, and she got her teaching job at Britt. And her sister and brother-in-law were teachers at Kanawha.
Yep.
And her parents thought it'd be safe to her to go down there because they were close by and so forth. So she became the home economics teacher at Britt. And then when I came home my sophomore year, would have been her first year, I met her at a non-alcoholic New Year's Eve party at Stuart Wallace's house, the basement. It's a house now that's, I think one of the Dons lived there right across from the park. We met at that time. And then she gave me a ride back to the airport, and then we started writing. And then she quit teaching at Britt after 2 years, and then she got a job out near West Point for my last year. And then we got married in June of '66, and we had that happen with her son. And I was a head wrestling coach. We did really well the first year, and then I started having PTSD problems. And so after 3 years of teaching and coaching, I got out of it and went into business where I could work on my home, and that helped a lot. But by 1977, I was not doing well. And so I was recommended to me that we should go buy a farm and get around plants and animals. And so we went, northern Iowa was flat, and we went through La Crosse and so forth. So we loved this area. So we went to a realtor in August of 1977 in Winona, Minnesota. They showed us 3 farms. We picked out this one now. It's 15 minutes from Winona in Wisconsin, or half an hour north of La Crosse, 15 minutes Winona, 7 miles south of Arcadia. We bought this 111-acre farm, and then we were able, with some financing and some friends, we got an adjoining farm. And so being around plants and animals really did help me a lot. We had a large family, and we burned wood, and we kind of dropped out of society. And then I got hit by a tree, was almost killed, and said I would never live, never going to walk. So I went back into teaching again. And then I got asked to talk about Vietnam to one of the classes. It was videotaped. That videotape got passed around. Pretty soon I was asked to talk in schools. So the superintendent said, "We want you to stay, but if you could help people." So I quit after 2.5 years at the school south of Eau Claire and started giving talks in schools on overcoming obstacles and drugs and alcohol and so forth. Did that for many, many, many years. Farmed, and of course retired from farming now and built a new house in '94, I guess it was. And so we still live out in the same place, and it's great to live in the country. And
what have you been doing during the pandemic? You been kind of home mostly, or? Oh
yes, yeah. I was a homebody anyway, because there's so many things that I can do outside on the farm here, and it's good for me mentally. It's good for my PTSD. It's good for me physically, and I still give talks once in a while. I'm still available to give talks or do something like this if somebody wants something like that. But I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm not retired. I work full time at home here.
Got to keep busy.
Right.
Do you want to give your plug for your speaking engagements and stuff like that, and your website while we're kind of on that topic quick?
Sure. If anybody wants to know about the speaking, you can go to www.bobsteenlage.com. Information there. You can call me or text me at my cell phone, 608-323-0243. 608-323-0243. You can email me at bob@steenlage.com, bob@steenlage.com, or you can go to Facebook. Facebook have an inspirational site. Don't get into all the politics and so forth. I have a lot of inspirational things and a lot of animal stories. But anyway, you can send me a message there. Or if somebody has any in-depth questions that may have been brought up that we didn't have time to answer, I'd be happy. I'm to the stage in my life now. I'll be willing to answer any question anybody wants to ask. personal, whatever. And, after the pandemic, I'll be available for talks, or if somebody wants to do a Zoom thing or whatever. So I think that's
Definitely.
everything.
You have a lot of cool stories and experiences and just great speaking ability that I think a lot of people could benefit from. And you showed me some other interviews and stuff you've done, so I think definitely people could hit you up on that. So
Sure.
I think we're gonna just kind of start wrapping things up here, Bob. As always, if you could donate to the Sanger Legacy Fund out there, if you're listening and watching this, that'd be great. If you want to sponsor the podcast, just let me know that you donated at sangerstrong.com, and then I'll mention you on the next podcast. Coming up, Bob, you've watched my previous ones. If you want to watch the next ones coming up, and then anyone out there, in a couple weeks here, I'll be talking to Jim Diemer. Jim was the quarterback on the 1973 state title football team. Coach Sanger's first of 3 titles. And Jim is also still a veterinarian in Britt, and his wife's a realtor. They're staples of the Britt community. I'm really excited for this one because we're going to walk through each game of that 1973 season. We're going to break down each game and talk about it. And then after that, I've finally secured Coach Gene Perkins and his son Steve to come on. Gene was the defensive coordinator for the football team for 35 years. And then Mark and Jim Timmerman will be on. Coach Sanger's second son, Rick Sanger. Don DeWaard will be my first Kanawha episode. And then the 1986 girls state champion golf team, they all want to come on. And then John DeLeon, Coach Al DeLeon's son, and possibly his other son, Justin, are going to come on and talk about their dad, the former wrestling coach who just passed away a couple months ago. And then Stacey and Seth Goepel are going to be on with me. So really excited about those episodes. Hope people want to continue watching. And then a couple more plugs. And then Bob, I have a favor of you of one of my 4th grade students.
Sure.
We're trying to get the press box at the football field named after Denny Brum because he was the PA announcer for almost 50
Yes.
years and he actually built the thing. So we need people to message Wayne Croneman, the superintendent of the schools. He's probably going to hate me for this, but I don't really care at this point. I think this is too important to not do. Let him know that we want the press box named after Denny. I think that'd be a big deal. Last thing, Bob, I told my kids about my podcast. I teach 4th grade, and a couple of them have been watching the podcast and think it's cool that their teacher's on the internet. I told them today that I was going to be talking to you, and I explained your wrestling background. I have a boy in my class who is obsessed with wrestling. He wrestles on the weekends during wrestling season, and it sounds like he's a pretty good little wrestler. And he said, Mr. Kroll, you have to mention me to Bob on the podcast. So Bob, this little dude's going to be watching. Is there anything you can tell him to inspire him to keep wrestling and to do his best?
Yes, to never give up. And besides wrestling, be involved in writing down things you're thankful for. Mm-hmm. And also be kind to people. And I'm happy to tell me his address and I'll send him a book. And this fits in what I was going to say here at the end. Be sure to write down at least 10 things you're thankful for. And here's a quote on gratitude that's really powerful. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos to order, confusion to clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. Gratitude makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. You cannot be grateful and be bitter. You cannot be grateful and be unhappy. You cannot be grateful and without hope. You cannot be grateful and be unloving. So learn how to be grateful as if your life depended on it, because it does. Thank you very much, Dan.
Cool. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.